welcome back to my channel, Manga Hoarder. My name is Laura, and today I'm doing a different video. Different one. And I try not to do this kind of video so much just because it does tend to lean on the negative side of things, and I do want to keep things a little bit more positive here. But I do want to talk to you about kind of the difference between physical and digital publishing and why I don't buy digital. And just sort of discuss what that means. I've heard some people, complain about digital, but I've never really heard too many people give the reasons that I have, and so I thought that I would discuss them with you. And particularly because I think some of the reasons that I don't buy digital are important, and I think some people don't actually know some of the things about digital. I'm not opposed to digital. I actually think it's a good thing, and I like reading it. I have no problems reading it, but there are some background issues, small fine print issues that I have with it as a form, so I just wanted to talk to you about it. So I'm just going to talk about kind of both digital and physical, mostly digital, and kind of what it is and what you can kind of expect from it, I guess. So I think the first thing, and I think the thing that most people will appreciate about digital, is that it's super portable. You can put it in your pocket, you can carry around thousands of manga, and I can't do that with a physical volume. I've got 7,000 volumes of manga in this room, well, also kind of escaping into other rooms, but I can't carry my collection around with me. There's no possible way. I could maybe, if I was feeling very strong, carry 100 volumes. I think that's probably the max that I could carry at a time. But who would want to do that? That would just, you would break your back. You couldn't really comfortably read it. It's not like you can pull it out on the train or the bus and just start reading a volume. So it's so portable. It's so convenient to have things digital. It compacts that file size, so you can just, it doesn't take up space at all. It doesn't take up weight. If I only bought digital, I would have a whole extra room, whole 2 rooms basically free to do something completely different in. I might be able to turn this room into, a studio or a study or, a guest bedroom or something, but instead it's full of manga, and it has to be that way, and I still have too much manga to even put on shelves. So there's manga on the floor, there's manga on tables, there's manga everywhere, and that isn't the case for digital. It's all in one compact place. It can be on your computer, you can put it up on your cloud, so it'll be on your phone or your whatever mobile device you're using, your iPad or tablet, any real thing like that. So it's pretty amazing what you can do, how much you can store. I think the other sort of thing about digital that's really great is that because it's not physical, it doesn't get lost, it doesn't get damaged, it doesn't age, it doesn't fade, it doesn't wear, it doesn't, if you spill on it, you can, wipe it clean or get a new device, and it doesn't sunburn. And look at these things. These were bought at a bookstore that was keeping their books near a window, and we've got sunburn, and if you were buying digitally, you would have these crisp white pages, these beautiful black inks. You don't get that print quality consistent across the board. A lot of the books that you have, may even have just very poor inks, may have very cheap paper, maybe very flimsy, will fall apart. I suspect that in about 50 years, most of these books will be so brittle from the glue drying out that I won't be able to open them without pages actually popping out. So this isn't exactly the best format if you want something to last a long time. But that being said, and you can do your research on this, that analog or physical forms are the most archivable. Digital is not an archivable form. It is entirely dependent on mediation and books are unmediated, which basically means that you don't need anything else besides your own brain and your own hands in order to use that material. So something like digital, you have to have the proper software, you have to have the proper computer, you might have to have the proper app, and knowing technology and how much it has changed over the years. I grew up in an age when people didn't have computers in their homes. We were the first people who had a color computer in my class. We were one of the last to have internet, and I had internet in my first year of university. We didn't have internet before that. So like, computers have changed so much, and I used to be able to save. I remember I used to be able to save, my reports that I would write for school. I was one of the few people who, my first reports I wrote on typewriter when I was in elementary school, and then reports in junior high school, I could save on a floppy disk. And when I got to university, I bought myself a laptop in that first year, and I had to decide, do I want a floppy drive or do I want a disk drive? And I settled for something that had a disk and floppy drive kind of converter, and so I could pop one out and put the other in. My very first paper that I wrote for university was too big to fit on a floppy disk. So I know that like, computing changes, and so you need something that is stable to be able to read these formats over a long period of time. And in computing, a long period of time could be a couple of years. So as far as archiving goes, books are actually the preferred method, the preferred means. There's lots of things that you can do in order to keep books lasting as long as possible. There's ways to treat them. I try not to be incredibly precious with my books. I certainly don't wear the white gloves. I don't put them in the bags, but I do have them in a confined room. I don't let them leave the house. I do have blackout blinds in this room so that they aren't exposed to the sun. I dust them regularly. So I do a lot of things in order to keep them as pristine as possible, because I know that I'm going to have this collection for a long time, or I expect I will. Maybe I will at one point decide to weed this down and get rid of my collection, but if I want this to last long into my life, I need to kind of protect the material. It is a lot easier to protect the material maybe on a sort of a shorter term or shorter scale on digital, but I know that in the future I might not have devices that will be able to play these things. That software, there's no way for me to keep it in line for a long period of time. So this makes digital format a little more ephemeral. It makes it kind of something that you would read it once and then kind of throw away, not expecting to read it again, because or expecting to read it a whole bunch right now and then kind of forgetting about later on, a couple of years down the road. So that's sort of what digital kind of means, because it is not an archivable format. More good things about digital is that it is very much kind of modifiable to your needs. There's a lot of sort of accessible technology that might be able to read sort of the text to you. I'm not sure that I have seen a couple of like audiobook graphic novels, but I'm not sure if it describes the image as well. So if it's like descriptive image, I'm not sure. I've never really looked into it, but I think that there is accessible technology that would at least read the bubbles for you. You can sort of change the contrast on your device. You can zoom in and, make things smaller, or, shift things around so that you can see them better. You aren't limited to the size of your device even to read a piece of or a page of a manga, unlike a book where, you've got one size fits all. Hopefully it all fits within that page. So if you need to zoom in, you got to get yourself a magnifying glass. Hopefully not too many of you are going to have to do that, but this is the way of it. Like, you have one chance to see it and one way to see it, and one way to interact with it. You get to look at it and you can read it and you can turn the page, and like there's a tactile level of interaction, but there's a lot more interaction, a lot more depth to reading when you are using a digital medium, and I actually really like that. I don't think it's completely necessary, particularly for myself, and I don't struggle with reading things a certain print size, but I do think that that's a really good thing and a really huge bonus for digital medium. But I do have a lot of negatives as well. And they all boil down to one very important fact, and that when you are buying digital manga, you are not buying digital manga. And I think that's a really important thing to know, is that when you are actually buying it, you are paying for a license. You are not paying for ownership. Nothing that you buy digitally is actually yours. You have the right to read it as long as the vendor that you have bought from has the right to distribute it to it, or has allowed you the right to read it. So at any point in time, they can sometimes involuntarily, but they can revoke any access that you have to digital medium. And I know that some people will say, oh, that'll never happen, but the problem is that it has happened. It happens frequently, just people don't know it. I have heard, particularly at sort of the dawn of the digital age, a couple of years ago when I think Kindle was being introduced, someone I remember reading had just packed their Kindle with tons and tons of titles. A couple of years later, all of those titles were removed because the person that they had bought from, the distributor, license and distributor, had actually lost their license and access, and so had to revoke all of those titles. And so they had spent a lot of money, hadn't read any of the titles. Now all of those titles are gone, and that's a big concern for me, particularly as a collector. I am paying a lot of money. I expect full ownership of that thing. I expect full rights to use it however I please, and you have very little rights besides being able to have that item on your device and read it. There are just about no other rights as a licensed user. I'm not a lawyer, so don't take every word that I say for 100% foolproof law. You definitely have to dig for yourself, look things up for yourself, but you are going to find that very few places, and this is the whole world of books, ebooks, ebook distribution, there are very few places where you as a user actually retain a full copyright ownership of that single item that you have purchased. It does happen, it's very rare, and I'm not entirely sure it's even an option for individual users, but it's like 99.99% of the time you're not actually buying the manga, and that's a problem. I went on a couple of websites, but the first one, and Kodansha's statement in their terms of use, I think is probably the most descriptive and most direct. So they have one statement in their terms of use that say the apps and any content available that would include digital manga to you through the apps or the websites, so any sort of downloading, are licensed, not sold to you. So they are very clear, these do not belong to you. You are just sort of paying for the right to use it. So that's a problem. I think that your chance of getting items revoked from your device are probably a lot lower because there are really good relationships between the Japanese companies who own the copyright of these materials and the English companies, but the chance is there, and that's what my concern is. If the company that you bought from, if you download from, goes out of business, that probably means they've lost the license and you have lost that item. Some cases, I think there was a contingent on Viz's app that said that as long as you downloaded the items to your app that they own, you would continue to have them on that app, but you can't transfer anything over, you can't upload anything, you can't move that app to a new device, you can't download, improvements to the software. Basically everything that's there is stagnant on that piece of software that you have on that device. And so you would probably be allowed to retain those items for the duration, but at what cost? You can't take them with you, really. You can't move them to a new place. So yeah, there's a cause for concern. I think a lot of people, when they're talking about the pros and cons of manga physical versus manga digital, are going to probably reference the price tag. Certainly digital manga seems cheaper than physical manga. Sometimes it's it's comparable. You know, I've seen, you know, physical manga for like $13 and then the digital volume for $9. So I think it's actually really similar in price. Personally, I don't want to spend $10 on physical manga, so when I see that price on digital manga, it seems exorbitant, particularly because that publisher is not having to go through the pains of putting it on paper. That's probably where a huge percentage of their cost goes, and if they're able to, or if they're not able to mark down the price as much as I think they should, then that means that the price of printing is very low and they should be able to afford to print. So I'm not really sure what the logic is there, except for that they're trying to make money, which is reasonable. I'm not, you know, I'm not opposed to people trying to make money, that's fine. But if you consider, I think how I kind of think of it in my mind, it's sort of the difference between renting a house and buying a house. You know, if you buy the house, you have a down payment, and you have sort of a monthly payment on all of your bills and your mortgage and all of that stuff. You don't have the down payment, probably, depending on where you live, for a rented space, a rented home, but you will have to pay for the bills and your rent, which is in many cases comparable to how much you would spend if you were bought a house. But at the end of things, you know, the landlord might say, oh, you know, we've decided to sell this property, or we've decided to change the rent, or we've decided to, you know, knock this down and build something else. You're out of a home, you have to go somewhere else. But you're also out of your money. You don't get that refund when you go because you've paid for the service of being allowed to live in this home that you don't own. Whereas if you had a home that you paid for, that you owned, when someone came, you know, maybe the city decides, oh, we're going to bulldoze all the homes here, you at least have an opportunity to reclaim some of the costs that you've invested into that home. And so whether or not you think the prices are comparable, at the end of the day, you get more money back in ownership because you own it, and you've completely given that money for a service. Basically, you're paying for a service in the license agreement. In the digital pathway, you're just paying for service. When the service is given, the money is gone. You don't get any of that money back because you've paid for a service. When you pay for ownership, as long as you own that thing, you still have some claim to some of the financial investment that you've made. So there's sort of a difference that way. So I actually don't see, you know, that slight difference in price to be cheaper for digital manga. I actually think it's just as expensive, if not more expensive, because when I invest in that thing, I know that money is gone. When I invest in manga, I can resell the manga. I could resell it for cover price. In many cases, I could resell it for 10 to 100 times market value, as some people seem to try to do. I think it's unethical and not logical, and you know, that's a whole different discussion about market value of manga, but I know that my money isn't completely gone. At the same time, I also have insurance, so if, you know, my collection is stolen or damaged, maybe there's a fire, or, you know, maybe my house collapses because my manga is so heavy that the floor caves in, you know, I still can reclaim some of the finances in my investment, and that, like, you know, I have to be really concerned about where my money goes, and for me, putting money into something where money is just gone is not an option. So that's sort of that's probably my number one concern. Certainly there's some other things to consider. If you look through sort of some of the terms of agreement, you'll see that you cannot resell your manga, you cannot use it on more than one device, you cannot share it with people, you cannot make any sort of copies, you cannot basically use it in any way except for read it. There are even some which have a clause that say you may not take it out of the country, and I think a lot of people like to think of manga as being incredibly portable. I'm just going to load up my device, I'm going to go overseas, and I'm going to enjoy that manga. They have in some of these terms of use stipulations where you cannot actually take that manga abroad. Probably, I would say, you know, personal experience, I would say probably is not, they're not going to come after you, but they're covering their butts. If you should do something inappropriate or something that they don't like, they can say, well, look, we've got this in our terms of agreement, and you've, of course, gone against them, you've broken those agreements. So I think it's very appropriate, very important for you to read through those terms of agreement, because you're not buying what you think you are, maybe. You aren't buying the manga. You're not buying digital manga. You're buying the license, the right to read digital manga on your device. But that's all. But I have said before that I'm not opposed to digital manga. You know, I have a strong aversion to it just because I feel like I've lost my money and I'm not getting anything out of it besides reading. And you know that the way that I buy manga is I buy a lot of manga, I only read a little bit of it every year, you know, with the sort of hope that I will read all of it eventually. It's maybe not the very best way to do things, but you know, I'll read 1 or 2 volumes as the series starts. I will collect the series, and when it's done, I'll probably go back and try and finish reading it. With digital manga, if you're going to be buying it, and you can, I'm not saying you can't do that, but you really want to be buying it and reading it immediately, because you don't know if that material will go tomorrow. Maybe the publisher loses their license. You know, they make agreements with outside agencies in order to have the rights to distribute and to license to other agencies, which are you. And in the case of, you know, manga, they have, you know, that strong relationship with Japanese publishers. You know, there are cases where you know, maybe a Japanese publisher is going to say, you know what, we're going to pull out of America because we don't like the way things are being dealt with, or we're not making enough money, so we're going to pull out. They pull away their license, and all of those copies are gone. So I do have sort of an option. I think it's a good option because I like reading digitally. I think it's really great. There's lots of really good benefits to it if I owned it. So the other option I think is, for one, there's some really good apps like the Shonen Jump app. I've been really impressed with it. I don't have it myself just because I'm not a big Shonen Jump reader, and the Shonen Jump that I want to read I already did own. My sister has it, and she really enjoys it, and it's nominal in price. You're paying for a service to use, and it more works on the model of like Netflix. So you're paying for a service that they provide you with a number of titles which can come and go as it pleases, but you can read things as they're up there. And I think maybe as people are more familiar with Netflix, it's not sort of as jarring when titles come and go out of that particular service. So that one in particular I think is really good. Plus, you know, spending $2 a month and being able to read basically unlimited titles on that app is such a better deal than paying $10 to be able to read a single volume that you can read in 15 minutes. So I think that's a really, really good option. The other one I would say to try and check out is your public library. Public libraries often have digital services. I think the most popular one is Overdrive, and they have an app called Libby, and they also have, there's another service out there that's called Hoopla my library doesn't have, which I know also has comics on it, not too much manga. But in Overdrive I know that there are agreements, because it's actually owned by Rakuten, which is a Japanese company. There are sort of agreements with particular manga companies to license manga to Overdrive, and so your library can purchase titles and you can borrow them from the library. You can read them for a short period of time. So it's the library that's taking the responsibility of the license, and you get to just read it, which is a really nice feature. You can also recommend titles to Overdrive, or to your library to buy from Overdrive. So if your library has Overdrive and they don't have enough digital manga, go to your library, either recommend it through Overdrive if that feature is turned on, or recommend it through your library. You know, get manga in the libraries, because the more manga that's out there, the more that they will buy, really, is what's going to happen. So those are my two sort of options. I definitely like using or reading manga through Overdrive. I've been able to read some Osamu Tezuka titles which aren't available in print, or are so out of print we can't collect them. So I've been really lucky that way, and I know that if you are lucky enough to have a library that can support that, or has that ability to kind of share manga digitally, you should really check it out, because man, does that ever save you a lot of money. And it's a really great way to read manga. So anyway, I think that's it for me to talk about digital manga. Let me know what your thoughts are on digital manga. If you like digital manga, definitely recommend some titles down below that are available licensed in English. I'd be really curious, and particularly other people who are fans of digital manga would probably be really curious to hear, you know, some recommendations as well. Yeah, you know, I don't have a problem with digital manga. I think it's great as a format, but manga publishers really need to change the model that they use in order to sell it to people. If they change the model, I would be all over it, and I would be collecting digital manga as well, but I guess it's probably good that they're not, because I don't need anything extra to be collecting. Yeah, so anyway, that's it for me today. Let me know your thoughts on the topic, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.